they say that PA is very intergenerational, and once we experience especially severe PA as children growing up, we're highly likely to practice it ourselves with our children. But I don't ever see you doing that, and I make a concerted effort not to do that myself.
Nice.
So absolutely not do that. What about you, Dawn?
So this is something that I really worried about when I stepped into this environment, because I did get a divorce, but I never taught my children to hate their father. And I told them constantly, as often as whenever they asked or whatever, he loved them. And I made sure that they knew that it had nothing to do with them, why we couldn't be together. They didn't know until they were into their 20s what had really happened. But what I didn't do is I didn't encourage that relationship either. So I didn't make them hate I didn't do the parental alienation part, but I didn't help them not to become estranged. But I was taught that parents were not required, because my mom abandoned me when I was 2. Then she abducted me when I was 4, and then gave me a new dad when I was, 8, I think. So that taught me that parents are interchangeable or not even really required. So when my husband said, and I believed him when he told me, I'll never pay you a dime in child support, I'll leave the country first before I ever do. I believed him. And he never did pay child support, ever. Not on his own. The only time is when the court garnished one time. That was it. He never tried to be that dad. So I believed him. And I just thought, okay, fine, I can do it myself. You're not required. Because that's literally what I was taught.
Yeah, me too. So that's a theme that's running through the three of us for sure. But I see, Rachel, you, like with your kids' dads, you're really open to them seeing your kids, aren't you? So you're the absolute opposite of an alienator, aren't you?
Almost to the point of they try not to, and I'm like, no, you must see your children, but I learned that the opposite is almost a detriment as well, in a weird way, because I was making people see their children who actually didn't necessarily want the consistency. So I've with my, I think you live and learn, because my son, when he could choose, by the time he was 17, so I guess when they get their license here at 17, he chose that he didn't want to see his dad anymore, even though I made him. And so with my daughter Brianna and her dad, I don't make her necessarily, but and even with my son, every 2 or 3 months with him, I'm like, have you seen your dad? Do you think you should talk to your dad? What about if you catch up for coffee? Oh, you're an adult now, you're 19. Do you think you could go for a beer with him? Because in Australia that you can go to pubs from 18. What about if you catch up for one beer with dad? And he's like, no, no, blah, blah, blah. But the whole time, the only reason they have a relationship is because I made it happen. Same with my daughter. She doesn't want to see her dad or anybody, but I'm always, and then I get feeling bad when they haven't seen each other for a month, and I'm like, and so I intervene all the time. And then when they get back, so then when they get back, Brianna's had a bad time. That's my daughter. And Mark didn't want to have her, and he just whinged that he had to have her the whole time. And I'm like, why am I doing this? This is about me. It's not about them. Because
good insight, Rach.
Neither of them, both of them are comfortable with not necessarily having a consistent fortnightly or monthly visit. It's me. It's me who's not okay that they're not seeing each other.
Yeah, I
had a question. Sorry, Rach. I'm just wondering, because the research is saying that a lot of the time when the parent who's not in the child's life remarries, it's often the person that they're remarried to who becomes extremely alienating towards the child. What are you finding with regards to that?
Oh, very, very much so. So this is what I mean, it's almost, I've gone to the polar opposite of an alienator. I even befriend or try and befriend my ex-partner's partners, no matter what my personal feeling is toward them. So that doesn't happen. And I even do the complete opposite. So Brianna will be going, my stepmom's this and my stepmom's that. And I'm like, oh, she can't be that bad. What is it that you're doing? And maybe you could like, so she likes painting nails and you like painting nails. Why don't next time you go over, you paint nails with dad's wife? Or do you know what I mean? And even though in my head I'm going, doesn't really sound right, but I'm trying to form these relationships that I wish I had had.
Yeah.
Because I've now formed a good relationship with my dad's wife, but I never had that, because all my mum ever did and still does is bag this lady out who is she's a psychologist and she's just lovely, but my mum never allowed me to form any kind of, and it took me till I was 30 to even see her for the woman that she is. And I want because I don't like my dad particularly for my own reasons, but his wife hasn't done anything wrong and she's actually really lovely. So I want to give my own daughter insight into, okay, you might not get on with dad, but is Beck really doing anything wrong? You know, like, yeah.
Yeah, because I remember her telling the story about the pictures, like the family pictures at Christmas time and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, how, hardcore.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so she's alienating, perhaps. I don't know. It's hard. It's a tough one.
Something to think about anyway for anyone who might be watching. Just realise that it's not always the parents doing the alienating. It can be other people around as well. So it can be the new stepfather. It can be the new stepmother. It can be the grandmother on that side as well.
And like everyone's trying to keep the peace.
Yeah, and we've got all these dynamics at play, and we've just got to watch.
It can be cultural.
Yeah, cultural. Yeah, okay. Do you want to speak a bit to that, Rachael?
Oh, I wasn't even necessarily talking about Italian or Aboriginal culture per se. But that can come into it. So Aboriginal culture is a whole different matrix of a family tree altogether. Like, so it's nothing like what I guess a Western family tree would look like. But I'm even thinking in terms of like it could be an amalgamation of other cultures where you actually have to do what the grandparents say. I mean, even there's a lot of cultures where that might be a substantive influence, and you know, you've moved on with your life, so you need to sort of ditch your old one, and that can have a huge bearing on how a child is treated. But certainly in Aboriginal culture, so this is to sort of flip the alienation on its head a little bit as well. In Aboriginal culture, it's not necessarily, so what actually happened to me, not the mum sleeping with my partner's thing, but the being raised by your grandparents thing is actually far more normal. Or your auntie, so your grandmother, so just going along the matriarchal line, your grandmother, your mum's sisters and your mother all have the same rights to you as a mother.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like, so the family tree goes like this, not sort of like that. It goes like this and then up and then like this. So, but the same patriarchally. So it's your grandfather, your father, and your uncles have the same rights to you. It's the same. Like you're their child. So to grow up with your auntie is the same as growing up with your mum, or growing up with your grandmother is the same thing. It's just the same thing. It's the matriarchal. That's more about the matriarchal line than it is about the individual child to you.
It's a little similar with our Greek ancestry, where when my grandfather died, his brother became the head of our family. Not that he replaced in any way, but it was like he was. And the way it was described to me as a child was that he's just like my grandfather, even though he's really my uncle, my great uncle. So father, I'm now my great uncle. But then it was like, you know, my great grandfather died, so he takes that role. More or less takes care of the family, so to speak, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was the bishop of the Greek Orthodox Church, and
oh wow.
Yeah.
Influence and power.
Yeah.
But I was talking to one of my supervisors the other day, Rachael, and as you know, my husband has Aboriginality as well. So we were discussing with the stolen generation stuff, when we had that whole population had that absolutely terrible thing happen.
White Australia policy.
Yeah, when they were moved into the other families, were they parentally alienating against the stolen children's families? Like that's a
Yes,
big thing that we were
100%.
thinking about the other day and talking about.
Of course,
Can you
yeah.
explain
It's something that I want to flag in here because of your Aboriginality and my husband's, and like this is a big thing.
Yeah.
It's not getting talked about.
Can you
Dawn,
explain real quick what the stolen
yes,
family
definitely. Okay, so the stolen generation arguably happened from as soon as Captain Cook landed in Australia, arguably. However, which was in 1788, when 11 ships came across and white man first made contact with Australia. However, the stolen generation was probably at its height when the White Australia policy came in, which was at the end of the 1800s. It really, really came to the forefront, particularly after World War II, so around the baby boomer period. So it was, I mean, Aboriginal children and families have been ripped apart and stolen, as I said, since first contact. However,
explain what that means though, Rach.
First contact is when Captain Cook came here in 1788.
No. And when they were stolen, like what happened then?
Yeah, so So what actually happened was when they actually made this policy to segregate the Aboriginal people from their land, basically, and that it was almost the same ideology as Hitler. So it was like literally go in from all angles. So they actually just didn't attack us by ripping our children away, which they did. And we'll put into, it wasn't just given to homes like the other families, they were actually predominantly taken to missions. And what distinguished on whether you went to a family or not was how Aboriginal you were. So to backwards map it again, so now if you're Aboriginal, you're Aboriginal. There's no such thing as, like, say me, I'll go, oh, I'm quarter Italian, or, you know, 1/8 English or whatever it is. When you're Aboriginal now, because of what's happened, and I will explain it, you're just Aboriginal. You're either Aboriginal or you're not, and there's no quarters, halves or anything, because when they stole Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, but predominantly Aboriginal people, they put them into what we call missions. So they were basically taken to, if you would like to think about it, like, because they were stock. They weren't treated as humans, they were treated as stock. So you were ripped away from your parents and where they lived on land. Pardon?
What time frame was this?
So it was really, really rife in the 1940s to 60s.
So after World War II.
Okay. Yeah, so pretty much after World War II, all the way up until probably when I was born, but really, really rife there between sort of 1950, 60, 70, in that sort of 20, 30 years was really, really, really bad.
Yeah.
They were taking Aboriginal people from their communities because they lived out in like how Native American people lived. Okay, so they're living in our version of a teepee. And just communities. So we're all around communities, and we actually call them countries. So just like you Native Americans have different names of things. So you come from either like a Dharawal land, or you come from
reservation.
Different reservations. Yep. Okay, and we actually call them reservations as well. Res or missions. Yep. And so they were taken to a mission where usually some kind of Christian-based priest or whatever would be there. And he would literally divide you up into skin colours. And so he would decide, because a lot of the time Aboriginal women were sleeping with like shearers, like white shearers and things like that. So you might have been at what they called a half caste or a quarter caste. And the whiter skinned you were, the more likely you were to get adopted out into a family, because the whole idea is that then you bred the Aboriginal out, because Aboriginal blood is the only, or DNA, is the only DNA that after 4 generations has no trace.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and they knew that even back then somehow. And so what they would do is they'd have, and I can send you pictures, but you'd have like a pure blood, and I'm going to use white terms for now, with apologies to any elders listening. They'd have a full blood Aboriginal, say, lady, and then she would have a child deliberately. This was their plan, with a white man, and then so their next child would be a half caste, and then that next child would be a quarter caste, and then the next child after that would be a quad something, whatever they called it, quad, forgot the name. But then so by the time that child had a baby, it was completely bred out. So the whole plan, it was like a whole big 100-year plan, if you like, that bloodline would be completely bled out. They also ripped them of any culture, so they weren't allowed to hunt, they weren't allowed to eat their traditional foods, they weren't allowed to play their traditional instruments, they weren't allowed to, they had to speak English. If they didn't speak English, anything from having your tongue cut out to just being absolutely flogged, and the abuse in these places was significant. Like I can't, anything you can possibly fathom, from 2-year-olds being whipped because they wet the bed, murders, everything, and they were completely removed. So that's why, so even myself, that's why I didn't even know, because my family were up near a place called Burke, so in the outback, and what they would do is if an Aboriginal person had a child, it was actually recorded during this time, it was actually recorded as stock, like as in either a sheep or a cattle, because we were referred to as flora and fauna, which is what indigenous means. So even in the Australia policy, Aboriginal people weren't counted. They were counted as animals. They weren't counted as humans, and so we weren't allowed to vote. If you were white enough, skinned enough, you could sign off yourself as an adult to say that you weren't Aboriginal. You'd have a thing around your neck that was called a beer ticket, and it was like the segregation in America. So you weren't allowed in, like there was distinctive toilets and pubs and all that, same kind of like, this is a coloured toilet and stuff like that, so same thing. And you had to actually sign off if you were white skinned enough and pass. So say I would pass, just, especially in summer, and you'd have a beer ticket, what they call a beer ticket, and you're allowed to go into white pubs. But if your own brother walked past you, you weren't allowed to acknowledge him if he hadn't signed the same waiver.
Wow. That is horrible.
Yeah.
And they're still recovering. It's
big time.
Awful.
Massive intergenerational stuff. Massive intergenerational stuff. So the trauma is so substantive that so because they were also introduced to alcohol, that really still affects our communities quite significantly. And so the parental alienation, in particularly Aboriginal culture, is really rife, because like I feel like me, I don't feel like I make any deep connections with anybody, to be completely honest with you, like what I'd call authentic. With anybody. I actually feel like I'm totally emotionally broken in terms of being able to I genuinely like people and I can feel love, which I actually probably think is more of a lust feeling. But my ability to actually feel love or any actual attachment to anybody is almost non-existent. I have to force myself to attach myself to people. And I feel like it's the same culturally, like there's just no attachment because of the stolen generation. Like there's no sense of belonging to anything or anyone.
Well, it's definitely talking about those long-term effects. And Alyse, you can maybe help us talk about, for me, when I was taken out of one world and thrust into another one, it kind of began what was, I consider, an identity crisis.
Oh yeah.
You can see that with what you're saying, Rachael, is, maybe that maybe that happened to you too. So how common would that be? Would this be something that a lot of us would actually have as far as one of the long-term effects? Do we suffer from identity crisis?
Well, 100%. It's the sense of self, because we don't understand who our authentic self is, because we're not allowed to have a voice. And a lot of the time we're so bombarded when we're really young, and there's a whole range of behaviours that go into it. So Rachel's mum was quite different to my mum, but it's all kind of manifesting in the same stuff. And the sense of self is really what we struggle with the most. And and just knowing who we are and having a voice is major for us. And for us to stand up and talk about our trauma when we've been told as children pretty much, shut up.
Yep.
Do not speak. Do not tell anyone what's going on. That's not going on. Your story isn't real. That's not what happened. The gaslighting is major. And Rach and I have these conversations, and we have them with my siblings and stuff. We're trying to figure out what was real, what's not, from different other family members. It's like one of my siblings says it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. There's a million plus pieces, maybe more. We don't know. It's black. And there's no picture. We're trying to put that together. That's what it's like. That's what it feels like for me.
And if we don't have access to one of our parents, then we don't have all of those puzzle pieces. So you don't even know what you're putting together.
Yeah, there's an entire family side I don't know about. Like I said in my presentation, when I reunited with my dad after 25 years, both my paternal grandparents were dead. My uncle had died by suicide. I had one uncle left, and I had no idea where my cousins or anyone else are or who they are. I think one's in Canada. That's all I know. So and then like Rachel was saying, there's a whole part of you don't understand historically, you have no attachment to anyone, and like the scrubbing the black out of you thing, Rach, like there's all sorts of stories of people, especially adult survivors, who've tried to change their appearance through cosmetic surgery so they don't look like the targeted parent. All sorts of stuff going on. This sense of identity is something that we try and get. We're not given it. We have to get it.
Yeah.
And this is what the courts aren't realizing. But
we're just now getting it. It's taken me until 2016 to really get that.
Yeah, and it's not okay to not teach your children their identity of their other side of the family. It's not okay, and it's not your right to do that.
It's not your right.
Human rights violation. It's child abuse. It's psychological child abuse. And it takes us our whole lives, and I don't even know whether I'm going to be able to finish the healing by the time I die, because the abandonment wound for me is so big, and it bleeds all the time, and I just have to keep finding new ways. This is what my research is in, trying to find new therapeutic ways to help adult survivors to just heal these wounds. And part of that is having a voice, and to be told by parents out there, I understand that they're in heaps and heaps of pain, but we've always been told to shut up and not have a voice, and now we're having a voice. And we are your children. We're the adult version of your children. So we are who your children are going to be in X amount of years, and we will be having these conversations with you. So, and they're going to be hard, but we're going to be asking these questions.
Yeah.
We're going to be wanting to know, why did you behave like this? Why were we not allowed to see that part of our family? And we're in grief a lot of the time too. It doesn't go away. It's complex. A lot of us have complex PTSD as well. So it's full on.
Yep. So I want to point something out that you just said. So a message to parents is sometimes a lot of them don't want to hear what we're saying. And I get it, because it's painful. They relate it to what their children might be going through. So I understand it's painful. But if you're not hearing it now, you're going to hear it then. And if you're hearing it then and not learning from it now, then you're not going to be ready.
You're recreating the cycle.
Yeah, totally.
Parents need to be ready to receive their children. When their children want to come back, they need to be emotionally healed themselves. Otherwise, they're not going to have that relationship. So listening to us now might help them get there.
Yep.
And it's also about them taking responsibility for their part in this as well, because divorce is so easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to look at that as well. Like, what is going on with the communication out here in the world? And why is divorce so easy? And this is the thing, a lot of the time I heard growing up, kids are resilient. Kids cope with more than everybody else thinks they cope with. Kids cope with going to lots of schools. That is not true. All of this stuff, I used to hear it all the time. It was the sentence that got dragged out anytime anyone questioned anything.
That's
no,
what I talked
kids
about
are
in my
resilient.
speech. I talked about that in my speech, that being told that is a myth, and that if anybody believes that that can possibly be true, they're either oblivious or they just don't get it. They don't care.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
telling a parent that they can wait until their child turns 18 and then they can have a relation with them is asinine. And telling a child that they can make their own mind up when they turn 18 is even worse. And that's just, it's unacceptable that anybody is being told this. And they're myths. It's not true.
Yeah. So do you have anything that you want to say to any adult survivors out there, Rach, that might be listening to us?
Yep.
I think she's frozen. Something's happened.
She'll come back in.
Wait. Yeah. She's probably going to have to go soon, but
what an amazing
she
story.
jumps back in. Yeah. Well, I want to really hear what Rachael has to say to any adult survivors who are listening of severe PA, because this is a very different category to mild or moderate.
Mm-hmm. This is amazing. I mean, it's a horrific story, but wow, it's unbelievable. And you know, she's beautiful, inside and out. You know, she's a beautiful person, and to come through everything that she's gone through and still try to, encourage her children to have a relationship with their fathers. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because with my daughter, I never say anything bad about her dad whatsoever. It's just not okay to do that. And just if we were going to say anything, it's just don't do it. If you want to talk about your ex, don't do it in front of your children. Even if they're in the house, they can still hear you. So don't think for a second that they're not listening or they're asleep, because we hear and see everything. We don't have much to do, really.
They remember. And yeah. She said the net went down, so she'll be right back. She'll be right in.
Okay. So how are you traveling with this interview, Dawn? What's it like listening to this story for you?
It's such a sad topic, and nobody wants to be a member of this group, is what we keep saying. But I think it's helpful to have the opportunity to talk together and share this, and giving her a voice. So this is her moment to speak to what happened to her. And the more we share and the more we understand who we are, like I said, we have similar events, and our stories are a little different. Some are worse than others in certain aspects, and then some are worse in a different aspect for someone else. But just knowing that you're not alone, and I think that's the big thing, is realizing that what we grew up with is not normal. It's not normal, and it seems normal because that's all you know, and you don't know what you don't know. That's
right. Exactly.
So
exactly. Because we didn't know. We just figured it. I figured it out, and then I rang her, and then I rang my siblings, and it's like I found the missing piece to the puzzle.
Yeah, and here's the thing: for all of the targeting parents out there, for all the ones that think that they can decide what their child can and can't do, and who they can and can't see, and who is really their actual parent.
Yeah.
We come to a point in time where now we're feeling betrayed. Now we are seeing things and remembering things, and we're going back over, and we are going to psychoanalyze every single thing that we can remember throughout our entire lives. And the targeting parent is not going to be on the winning end of that stick, or that scenario. So once children start waking up and understanding, the adult children or even the young adults, once they realize that and they feel that sense of betrayal, we already have a trust issue. So
do you mean the alienating parents?
Alienating,
yeah.
The ones that are doing this to the children.
Yeah. That little video that you sent me yesterday of the judge with that little tiny girl in court, where that woman was cheering when the man who thought that he was her father biologically, after 3.5 years, found out he wasn't, and she was cheering in the court, and the judge hammered her. That was another big message as well, because I get people coming in to see me privately who talk about they're pregnant, but they don't want anything to do with the person that they're pregnant to, so they're dating a new guy, so they're going to tell him that it's his child. That is a conversation that they don't, when they're talking to me about that is not something we have a big conversation after that they don't expect.
Does this happen in your country, where we have the CPS and the Department of Children's Services, and maybe the federal government? I'm not sure whose idea this is, or if it's because of the act that was signed back in the 80s, but when a child does not have a father, most of the time, this is going to start happening to mothers, but when a mother, a single parent, decides to remarry, the Department of Children's Services, or CPS, doesn't care if you're related or biological, or if you are a good person. They don't do background checks. So if she's going to get remarried, and since that is your male role model now, or maybe your mother role model later, depending on the scenario of the parents, they don't investigate who this person is to find out if they would be a good parent. So they don't really care if there is any trouble in the background. They just want a body. They want someone there so that they don't, so the welfare system doesn't have to deal with the child. So
that's really awful.
They're just throwing kids into these, if you want to step up and take care of that kid, we're going to let you. Boom, there, done. If you want to step up and take care of this kid, boom, done. They don't care if you're actually family or not. They don't care what your background is. They don't care. They just want a body that is going to take responsibility. And then if they divorce, they don't care. You took responsibility for that child, so it doesn't matter if it's not your biological child. You took responsibility, so therefore you have to pay child support. And they don't care.
Wow.
This is why I am against CPS in so many ways, where or children's services, when they take that position, because it should matter. It should matter.
It absolutely should matter. It will matter to the child when they grow up with a major identity crisis. It's going to matter, all right, to them. That's who should be coming first. But before we finish, because I know Rachel has to go and I have to go soon, do you have any messages for adult survivors of severe parental alienation like we all are? Do you have any messages for them? Because there are so many trapped with no voice still. Do you have anything you'd like to say to them, Rach? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would definitely say work on you, because you should not, and you have absolutely no right to put your stuff onto your children. You chose to have children, and look, there's obviously always exceptions to the rule. If you've chosen to have children with somebody who is a complete druggo and abuser, then that's a whole other story. However, if you're alienating your children just because it impinges on your life, or because you just don't particularly like them anymore, or because of personal reasons, then you need to work on you and do your stuff, because you have no right to to make those decisions for your children, because you didn't give them the right to make that decision when you decided to have children with that person.
So you're talking to the alienator now, aren't you?
Yeah, that's my message to the alienator, absolutely. For those of you who have been alienated, I would also encourage you to do your stuff, which means go and get some help, because otherwise most likely you will repeat patterns of behaviour, because that is human behaviour. We always mirror what we do.
What we're taught.
We absolutely do what we're taught. So I would suggest that you go and get some counselling and get some help before you move on and have children of your own, if it's not too late, or it's never too late to get the help. And sure. I would definitely encourage everybody, and I don't know about all around the world, but certainly in Australia, there's ways to gain free access to counselling to work on this. So you need to stop looking for excuses. I know that there's online services, and I know that there's lots of people that you can speak to about the alienation that you've gone through, and that maybe that you've inflicted on your own children with, usually, I'd like to hope, unintentionally, but we do it. And it does have lasting effects, and it has become intergenerational. So stop it.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well said. Thank you, Rachael. Thank you for coming on and being so brave and talking to us. And now we've got like more of us in the severe PA group.
Yeah.
I enjoyed spending this evening with you. Thank you for sharing your story. I really appreciate that. And I admire you. You're a beautiful woman. So, and so are you, Alyse. I mean, I think we're really doing something great. And, we turned out okay. But what I'm hearing between the three of us is that we worked on it. We didn't get to this place.
Exceptions.
Yeah. So, I think we all really did put a lot of effort into who we are today. We took control over our lives. We took our identities back, and we are now saying who we are.
Exactly. And it takes a lot of work. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's
very
hard.
confronting.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. You've got to go into the pain.
And usually comes from a anxiety-driven engine at first, because that need to control the next thing that happens. But that doesn't matter. Use that. Use the anxiety to make yourself better.
That's a stimulation almost, and I'm going to describe it this way. There might be a better way of describing it. But when you feel anxiety or you feel fear, that's a stimulation that you need to move. You need to get off that spot, fix something, and feel better about it. So however that transition happens, those emotions are meant to move you. They're meant to get you to change something that you're not comfortable with.
And it's not until we understand the physiology and why we're experiencing these emotions very quickly. It's not until we understand the background of them, which we learn by going to therapy, that we can then start to understand what the triggers are, how to deal with the triggers, settle down the emotions, and look at it from a different angle. That's what we're working on all the time. And that's what my research is in. Yeah.
And I think we will always be working on it. I think that's something that we will always end up doing for the rest of our lives, just to keep ourselves on task and not being stuck back into that. And I think, if we don't care for ourselves, if we don't love ourselves, it would be easy to fall back into that. So we are here to support each other. That's why we're doing
and there is help. We can stop these patterns. We can stop them. We just have to understand them. There's lots of different ways we can work with them, move through them, and start to get our lives back and our identities back, and not always stay in that fear space. There's lots of hope for us.
Absolutely.
So thanks, girls.
That's okay. I better get going. I've got a few people waiting. So I better get going. But thank you very much for allowing me to. I think even things like this can be quite cathartic, and it makes you feel a lot less alone. So thank you.
If you ever want to come back, just let us know. We will do this as often as you want, even if it's just chatting.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a chat. Like, please, let me know when you're having a chat, especially during these times. I'm very much an extrovert, and I'm not doing okay. So.
Yes,
It's an introvert world at the moment, and Rachel and
I'm
I
an
are struggling.
That work from home, so I'm always home, and now I'm stuck at home. I'm like,
not okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes.
Okay, girls. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.